One of the problems I've seen with people who stutter, and this is true in my own story as well, is that we tend to either look for a cure or nothing at all. So we tend to look at our speech and our desire for improvement through a black and white lens. And this is a problem. And just as a quick example off the top of my head here, a tree doesn't go from, underneath the ground to 30 feet above ground like an on-off switch, right? It's a process of growth. That is what life is like. That is what improvement is like. And it's no different with our speech. So one of the qualities that you want to embrace and really become as comfortable with as possible is living in the gray. You want to be okay with the gray area. Things are just not going to be black and white when you are in a process of learning a skill or improving a skill. People don't go from being a stutterer to not being a stutterer as if it's like an on-off switch. It's not how this works. You go from where you are, and then it's a step by step, bit by bit, piece by piece. You improve here, you make an improvement there, and then that compounds, that builds, and then over time, you cross the threshold and you reach a high level of fluency. Okay, and there's a specific number that I want to bring up here, and that is the number 90%. The truth is you don't need to aim at some, 100% fluency number. That isn't going to be all that useful. And instead, you want to set the bar a little bit lower, at least for the first few weeks on this journey. That way, it'll actually feel somewhat attainable, which is very important for just our positive energy and the motivation we feel and the belief in ourselves that we can reach that target eventually. And so when you have a number like, okay, I want to become 90% fluent or even 80% fluent or even 70% fluent, that is a number that is feasible. That's a number you can reach, right? And so that is where you want to start. So now the question is, what is the easiest path to 90% fluency? Well, I'll give you an example using an analogy to help you understand what this process actually looks like. How do you achieve that 90% mark in your fluency? And how do you do it in the easiest way you can? This process is simply, it's a lot like if you're trying to improve the number of push-ups you do per set. And so if you're starting, let's say at 12 push-ups and you want to get to say 25. Okay, so maybe on day one, you're doing 12 reps per set. And then the next day you come back, you maybe do 13, 14. And then week over week, as you continue to do your push-ups, you go from 15 to 16 to 18 to 20 to 22. Eventually, you're going to get to 25. But it didn't happen overnight. You didn't go from 12 to 25. You slowly built it up. And that is the easiest way. It really is. There is no easy way to go from doing 12 push-ups and then being done after 12 to then all of a sudden the next day doing 25. Your body is not going to be able to do it. And your brain works in a very similar way to when you're trying to maximize or extend the number of push-ups you're doing. It takes time. This is a growth process. As I mentioned earlier, it's a lot like a tree. You're not going to go from underground to 30 feet above ground. And even if you were able to do that, to make that crazy improvement in a tiny amount of time, then most of the time, and this is really important for you to know, any type of quick fix that somebody promises you, whether it's like a 3 days, overcome your stutter in 3 days, or even a week or 2 weeks, even if within that concentrated amount of time, even if you see great results, that's like a tree that grows so fast that it's actually unstable. And then in the case of your speech, if within 3 days you you believe that you're going to overcome stuttering in those 3 days. Maybe by the third day, you actually see really good improvements because you're working so hard and you're really focused, and it's a very intensive process, and you start to get the feedback, that positive feedback loop, and you start to feel good, about it. See, I had a little stutter there. Well, then what is going to happen most likely is that due to the lack of a foundation, you are probably going to collapse, and you're probably going to relapse and go back to the old habits. And it might even be worse than before, because now you have this new disappointment, this new frustration, this new memory of, I tried. Perhaps you spent a bunch of money and you got the results in the short term, but it didn't stretch out into the long term, right? And so when I say the easiest path to 90% fluency, I'm simply referring to the easiest, most realistic path to 90% fluency. There is no easy path that is going to immediately get you neuroplasticity on a grand scale. That's not how the brain works. Okay, you need to be patient with this. But it's not quite as hard as we sometimes think it is. It takes work, but I think sometimes we think that it's this incredibly convoluted process, and that's usually not actually the case. It ends up being quite simple as you start to familiarize yourself with the process. So to bring this home, I want to give you 4 steps that you want to follow on this path of, okay, what is the easiest path to 90% fluency? Here are the 4 steps you need if you want to reach that number. Step 1, you got to get a plan and you got to put in the work. I would say at least 5 days a week. So if you can get a plan and you put in the work 5 days a week, I would say 30 to 60 minutes a day, at least 30 minutes, Even you can go over an hour, and that would be great as well. But you need reps. You need practice. Your brain is, yes, it's plastic. Yes, it changes. Yes, it has incredible ability to rewire itself. But on the other hand, it's also very rigid. And especially habits that you've had for years and decades, like your speech, that is not going to change easily. And so you need to just constantly just push through the barriers of those old habits and make these new fluency habits as strong as possible. And you do that by practicing and practicing a lot. Okay, and that's what I teach you to do with my free workshop. I have a link in the description. That's always where I recommend my students to start with. It gets you up to speed with my method here. It's 100% free. It gives you a plan to get you started. So be sure to go check that out if you feel like you don't have that plan, okay? But that's step 1. Get a plan and put in the work at least 5 days a week. Now, step 2 on this path to 90% fluency is you need to keep a good mindset, and you need to defend yourself against feelings like pessimism and frustration. You need to be able to rise above those. Or I would also say you need to be able to channel those emotions, because you are going to feel frustration. You are going to have moments of pessimism, probably of anger, of just annoyance. And all of these emotions, it's not about repressing them, because that's not going to get you very far. And instead, we want to channel those emotions and make that energy work for our benefit. So to give you an example, if I went to the drive-through, let's say I was going to Starbucks and I stumbled over what I was trying to order, maybe a grande latte or something like that. Of course, I'm going to feel that frustration, that rush of anger, of frustration. What do you do with that? What is the best thing to then do with that? Well, I remember back in my days of when I was really trying to be intensive about it and work really hard at improving my speech. One of the things I would do a lot is when I would have a moment like that and I would feel so frustrated about an interaction or what I deemed as a failure on my part to speak fluently, I would literally that same day, when I would be home, I would practice for like an hour and a half. Just take all that frustration out and put it into practicing. I didn't do this all the time. It's not like I was perfect with this, as if I'm some, paragon of perfection. Yes, I worked hard, but I had periods of my life too where I kind of slacked off. So if you find yourself in that pattern, that's okay. But you want to get yourself back on track as quickly as you can. And this is one of the ways that you do that. You don't allow the frustration and the pessimism to push you away from your speech. And instead you want to channel it and use that energy to go and maybe even that same day just work for 2 hours and just practice the routine that you perhaps get from my workshop or one of my programs. And then the cool thing about that is you've actually dealt with those emotions in a positive way. Instead of repressing them or trying to just push them down, which then is going to cause problems down the road as those emotions continue to build up. Instead, you want to channel it and put it into something productive. And in this case, I think the best way to do that is just when you feel that anger and that frustration, put that into your practice time. It's a really powerful approach to have. Okay, so that's step 2. Keep a good mindset and don't allow the feelings of pessimism and frustration to keep you from doing the work. Now, step 3 in this 4-step process to finding 90% fluency is try to be 1% better than you were yesterday. This goes back to the push-ups example that I gave earlier and the tree example. We have to be okay with this type of improvement. This is what I called earlier living in the gray. We need to embrace this. You're not going to make 90% improvements from one day to the next, or 100% improvements, or 300% improvements. That's not going to happen. You need to simply focus on being 1% better today than you were yesterday. That's the goal. Now, you're not always going to be successful, because one of the important things to know too is that it's not a linear path. This isn't a straight, stairs that constantly, that you only go up the stairs and today is always better than yesterday. That's not how it works at all. It'll be sometimes you'll take 2 steps up and then 3 steps back, and then 1 step up and then 1 step back. And you'll have bad days, you'll have good days, but then as you continue to focus on improvement, as you continue to focus on being the best speaker possible, and you really are diligent with your practice habits and everything that I teach you, then eventually the positive days will start dramatically outnumbering the negative days. So then you do start to really feel like almost every day is better than the day before. But that's not always going to happen. But that's the goal you want to have. When you wake up in the morning, you don't want to beat yourself up for, I wasn't, I forgot to implement what I knew I should have yesterday. I spoke too fast, or I didn't relax enough. And instead, you're like, no, okay, that's okay. It didn't go as smoothly as I wanted it to yesterday. Here's what I'm going to do today. I'm just going to be 1% better than I was yesterday. That's the only thing you need to do on a day-to-day basis. Just get a little bit better. Okay? And finally, step 4 in this process is don't give up too soon. Just don't give up. It takes time to really embed these patterns, these habits, these behaviors into your brain. It takes time, it takes patience. And so if you can simply be more patient than everybody else, I mention this all the time, if you can just be more patient than everybody else who goes down this journey and then gives up after 2 weeks or 3 weeks, if you can just be more patient and more diligent and focus more on the 1% improvement day after day, that is what is going to sustain you. That is what is going to put you at the front of the line and actually give you the best chance you could ever have for making transformational improvements with your speech. Okay? So that's step 4. Don't give up too soon. It takes time to learn the new habits, and it also takes time to unlearn the old habits. That's what neuroplasticity is. And so there you go. Those are the 4 steps to reaching that 90% fluency mark, and then of course beyond 90% as well. But as I mentioned, if you can just set the market like 90% or 80% or 70%, and then start working towards that, once you reach that, then anything's possible. Okay, so don't set the number at 100% right away or 99%. Work your way up. Be like a tree, my friend. Just be like a tree and embrace the slow growth process. Embrace the gray area. Stop looking for black and white. Okay, so if you found this video helpful and you want to dive deeper into my method, as I mentioned before, I have a free training. It's my Stop Stuttering workshop. I'll leave a link to that in the description below. If you truly implement this and you put your heart and soul into it, you could achieve 90% fluency, as we've been discussing here, in as little as 6 weeks. Now, that's a bit of a loose, open-ended number. Everybody's different. It'll probably take you longer than that, right? But some people, depending on just the way that your brain works, depending on your situation, maybe it'll take 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 9 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever it is. But this is the plan. Remember, one of the things that, like step 1 of these 4 steps that I just shared with you, was to get a plan and put in the work. You need just a little bit of structure. A little bit of structure goes such a long way, and that is what this workshop gives you. Okay, so I will leave a link in the description below. Be sure to go check that out, and I will see you over there. Okay, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.